Threat Assessment at Middlebury College. Thank you for participating in this Threat Assessment at Middlebury training. The purpose of this training is to provide our community with education about Middlebury College's Threat Assessment Team and the situations in which they do and do not respond. Further, we hope to equip you with the tools to identify concerning behaviors while also educating you on the resources within our campus community that are designed to help. No one is expected to handle their concerns alone. Before we begin, we'd like to express our gratitude to those that assisted in the creation of this training: the University of Vermont, Vermont Violence Project, the University of Illinois at Chicago's Violence Prevention Training, and the University of Arizona's Office of Public Safety's Threat Assessment and Management Team. Before we continue, we'd like to acknowledge the subject of this training may be upsetting for some. In an effort to effectively educate and prepare our community, we will be covering topics such as threatening behavior, violence, and mass shootings. We encourage you to take the time and space you need to process the sensitive information provided to you throughout this training. Please remember that these campus resources are here for you. Counseling, timely care, care management, EAP, and the Department of Public Safety. Learning objectives for this training include: define threat assessment in general terms as well as specific to Middlebury College. Define targeted violence, warning behaviors, and pathway to violence. Discuss the role of an engaged bystander. Learn how to report concerns to Middlebury's Threat Assessment and Management Team. So what is threat assessment? The Department of Homeland Security defines threat assessment as effective, proactive, and protective measures that are designed to prevent, not predict, potential acts of targeted violence. It is a process that helps to identify and mitigate the risk of targeted violence. Threat assessment is proactive, a systematic process, fact-based, collaborative through a multidisciplinary team effort. It involves individualized, data-informed assessments and interventions. And lastly, it has a focus on intervention and support. Threat assessment is not profiling. Threat assessment focuses on behavior, not the demographic information or personal characteristics of the person of interest. Punitive. As previously stated, the focus is on support, not punishment. Predictive. Threat assessment does not predict what someone may do in the future, but rather attempts to manage the behaviors currently being observed. A restriction of free speech. A promised outcome. Rather, it's a promised process and approach. The goals of threat assessment include maintaining safety within our community, preventing violence using effective, individualized interventions, and preventing disruption of critical operations. How does threat assessment happen at Middlebury? Middlebury is committed to maintaining campus and workplace environments that are safe and secure for all students, staff, faculty, and visitors. As part of this commitment, Middlebury has established a Threat Assessment and Management Team known as TAM, which is trained to assess potential threats to the Middlebury campus community. In cooperation with other Middlebury teams and offices as appropriate, this team formulates appropriate intervention and management strategies in response to situations where an individual's behavior and/or statements suggest that they may present a threat to the health or safety of others. TAM members are professionals in safety, counseling, information technology, student life, and human resources. For more information about the scope and role of this team, you can visit go/TAM or go/threat assessment. Let's return to the earlier definition of threat assessment. a process that helps to identify and mitigate the risk of targeted violence. What is targeted violence? Targeted violence refers to violence that is predatory and instrumental, and where the perpetrator and intended victim are known or knowable in advance. The defining feature of targeted violence is that the perpetrator selects a target before the violent incident. Perpetrators of targeted violence have made a calculated decision to engage in acts of violence as a means to an end. Some key takeaways from this definition are: targeted violence is planned and intentional. It is against a specific target that was selected in advance, and it is used to achieve a goal of some kind, such as righting a perceived wrong or injustice. Targeted violence is often confused with reactive violence. While targeted violence is planned and intentional, reactive violence is impulsive and immediate, response in the heat of the moment with little warning, spontaneous and random, the result of intense emotion and expressiveness, such as anger and fear, focused on immediate threat reduction and led by the fight or flight response. To help illustrate the distinction between the two, let's review two scenarios. As you're reading, consider the differences between the two. Scenario 1. At a staff meeting, it is announced that Alex is being promoted. Alex's teammate, Sam, is angered as they felt that they were more deserving of the recognition. Following the meeting, Sam immediately confronts Alex in the break room. The situation quickly escalates to physical violence. Scenario 2. At a staff meeting, it is announced that Alex is being promoted. Alex's teammate, Sam, is angered as they felt that they were more deserving of the recognition. They perceive this as a slight as well as an injustice. Weeks later, Sam approaches Alex at their home with a weapon. In Scenario 1, Sam confronts Alex in the moment. It's an impulsive confrontation led by intense anger. In Scenario 2, Sam perceives the decisions to promote Alex as an injustice. Rather than react in the moment, he plans another targeted approach and confronts Alex at their home, armed with a weapon. How do I know what to report? Excellent question. It's much easier to tell if someone is engaging in reactive violence than it is to determine if they're considering an act of targeted violence. Threat assessment teams often look for what is called warning behaviors. These are observable actions that create concern for the well-being of the individual in question. These behaviors include verbal, making direct or indirect threats. A direct threat is a clear and explicit statement of intent to cause harm. For example, I'm going to punch you. An indirect threat is a vague statement that implies violence without clearly stating it. For example, I could hurt someone if I wanted to. A veiled threat is a statement that strongly hints at violence without directly saying it. They don't deserve to breathe. Lastly, a conditional threat is a statement that threatens violence if certain demands are not met. If you don't do what I want, I will hurt you. Other verbal warning behaviors include a fixation on weapons or violence in conversation, discussing violent fantasies. The individual reports they feel forced into a last resort position where violence is the only answer and the consequences are justified. I had no choice. You pushed me to this. Behavioral warning signs include sudden changes in mood, personality, or behaviors, increased isolation, low self-esteem, strained interpersonal relationships, erratic behavior, neglecting personal hygiene or appearance, substance abuse, stalking or harassing behavior, increased irritability, intense reactions or outbursts. In addition to verbal, last resort warnings could also be witnessed behaviorally. Examples include selling their belongings and/or getting rid of pets. Physical warning behaviors include changes in sleep patterns, aggressive body language, physical signs of stress, such as red face, clenched fists, or rapid breaths. Other behaviors include writings or drawings depicting weapons or violence, significant change in life circumstances, such as loss of a job or relationship, fixation on violent events or persons who have engaged in violent acts. It is important to note that these behaviors are not definitive predictors, meaning their presence alone does not mean someone will engage in a violent act. It's also important to consider the context in which these behaviors occur. For example, someone may become fixated on weapons because they are doing a school project or may struggle with their sleep due to a new job or other change in their schedule. When in doubt, report. It is better to over-report than under. The threat assessment team will then gather additional information to determine if the threat is credible and if the person may be on the pathway to violence. Research shows that individuals who engage in targeted violence often follow a pattern, referred to as the pathway to violence. This includes the following stages: ideation, deciding to commit an act of violence; research and planning, developing a plan to make it happen, such as researching the target, exploring possible locations, and determining the appropriate tactic; preparation, acquiring the necessary tools to carry out the plan; and lastly, implementation, committing the act of targeted violence. Research also shows that in many of these situations, there are signs beforehand, such as the warning behaviors we've just discussed. A key takeaway is that, in the case of targeted violence, people don't just snap. In addition to engaging in warning behaviors, the person of interest may also engage in leakage. This means some form of warning communication that they intend to commit harm. This could be a text message, internet post, or passing comment. Identifying this behavior and notifying the appropriate resource is how you can do your part as an engaged bystander. Everyone can play an important role in preventing targeted violence by reporting concerns to the appropriate resources. According to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, an engaged bystander is someone who intervenes before, during, or after a situation when they see or hear behaviors that promote violence. Let's review the role of an engaged bystander more closely. Before we talk about what engaged bystanders do, let's discuss what they do not do. They do not label individuals, base their concerns solely on gender, religion, race, or other characteristics, diagnose and/or suggest treatment, investigate. Engaged bystanders do remain impartial, report concerns that come to their attention, maintain knowledge of resources, both on campus and within the larger community, and contribute to the safety of their community. Engaged bystanders can make a difference. In February 2024, a student at a California high school reported to authorities that one of their peers, Sebastian Villaseñor, appeared to be fixated on weapons and stories of mass shooting. Authorities searched the home of Villaseñor and seized 7 rifles, 3 handguns, a shotgun, and more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition, all of which were legally owned by his parents. Upon investigation, law enforcement found that Villaseñor had mapped out the distance between the school and the police station, researched first responder response times, and identified a hit list of students. It is believed that the planned attack was to take place the following month, on the anniversary of Columbine. We can see evidence of Villaseñor's pathway to violence throughout this story. At the time of law enforcement involvement, he was somewhere between research and planning and the preparation phase. This is evidenced by his hit list as well as his research on first responder routes and response times. It is difficult to say where he was in the preparation phase, as he had direct access to many weapons within his home. Villaseñor has since been charged with 5 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of attempted criminal threat. Regarding the student that took action after observing Villaseñor's warning behaviors, the local police said, That student saved lives, spared families from losing their children, and a community from being devastated from a senseless act of violence. This decision tree may help to guide your response if you notice some concerning behaviors. If there appears to be an imminent threat or danger, call 911. If you're unsure, you can make a report to Public Safety and/or to the Threat Assessment Team, or TAM. If there doesn't appear to be an associated threat, consider reporting to other campus resources, such as care management or counseling. Once you've determined that a report should be made to the Threat Assessment and Management Team, there are several ways in which you could submit it. There is an online reporting form found at both go/TAM and go/threat assessment. The form allows for anonymous reporting if needed. However, by identifying yourself, the Threat Assessment Team will be able to more fully investigate, assess, and respond to your concerns. Anonymous reports will still be pursued, but the team's options may be limited. If it's an urgent situation, you can call Public Safety at 802-443-5911. A reminder that anything life-threatening should be reported to 911. Before we conclude, we'd like to highlight some available resources. Campus resources include counseling, care management, timely care, health services, human resources, and employee consultation and support options, or EAP. State resources include mental health crisis text line, suicide hotline, physical abuse or violence, including the domestic violence hotline, sexual violence hotline, and the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. And lastly, some national resources: the National Domestic Violence Hotline, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, National Sexual Assault Telephone Hotline, National Alliance on Mental Illness Info and Referral Line, National U.S. Child Abuse Hotline, Between Friends Domestic Violence Crisis Line, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Admin, Crisis Text Line, Half of Us Crisis Hotline, and the Veteran Crisis Hotline. Thank you for your participation in this training. Please don't hesitate to reach out to the AVP of Safety and TAM Chair, Demetria Kirby, if you have any questions. And please remember, your role as an engaged bystander is an important one. Speaking up is one way we can all care for our community.